Joining us today, we have the great pleasure of spending some time with Mr. Daniel Flynn, the author of the infamous and one of my favorites, Intellectual Morons: How Ideology Makes Smart People Fall for Stupid Ideas. And he also wrote the choicely titled "Why the Left Hates America: Exposing the Lies That Have Obscured Our Nation's Greatness." He's a frequent campus speaker. Your articles have appeared in the Boston Globe, the American Enterprise, the Washington Times, Human Events, National Review Online, among other publications. He has been interviewed on Fox News, MSNBC, Sky News, Showtime, PBS, and Court TV, and has appeared as a guest on several hundred radio talk shows. Anyways, just to get started, your new book, A Conservative History of the American Left. I've had some time to look over it. I've been finishing up a final, so I haven't been able to really dig into it deep. But just to start things off, the title itself. A lot of my friends, when I'm saying you should check out this book, they say no. Why would I want to check out this subjective piece? You know, it's not. It's so subjective. Just when they hear the title, they don't even want to check it out. But at the same time, I feel that you've actually made a very objective look at the left on many accounts, basically just citing everything factually. Everything's there in the book, in the footnotes and in the endnotes. And I feel, what do you say to people who would say, I'm not going to read this because it's just a subjective political ploy here?
Yeah, I've actually been hearing, I've been surprised. I've been hearing that a lot, that the title has put people off. And I thought it was just an honest way of presenting what the book is. I am a conservative, and I'm writing a book about the American left. I think if you were to have a left of readers any sort of advance warning on the cover where they stand. In fact, they would try their hardest to cover up what their political beliefs are. I really don't believe in that. I think, all authors have biases, and I certainly have some, but it's our job to try to overcome them and to see, the left not only in their own terms, but in the way other people see them. And so what I try to do with the book is not only present the conservatives' take on the history of the American left, but to conserve, using that word conservative in a different sense, conserve all that which the left has thrown down the memory hole, because a lot of what I cover in the book are politically incorrect figures that don't really fit into the current leftist narrative, and a lot of politically incorrect events that the left tries to pass off on the right, but is really part of their own history.
Right, and one of the first things I saw how you got started in the book is you begin with, and I guess, I've done a lot of reading, I've studied a lot of history, but I never even knew that, I think it was at Plymouth. Was it at Plymouth that was the original communist colony?
Yeah, at Plymouth Rock, this is, irony of ironies, their capitalist investors organized their colony on communist principles. And so they shared the wealth, and they shared the cooking and the washing and all of the what you would have to do to make a colony survive. There wasn't any individual incentive to sort of make it better, and as a result, people were literally starving. Their bellies were sort of popping out and that kind of thing. Within a short period of time, they stopped that, and the colony was amazingly successful. And I think the lesson there is that socialism works for men who don't. Capitalism works for men who do, and that's the lesson that you draw from a lot of the colonies and communes that I talk about in the early period of American history.
Right, and most of these colonies were founded on ideas founded on religion. And Wes, one of the interesting things I think I noted when looking over the book was how the original left in America was a religious left, and most of the time in our history, there's been this kind of divide between freedom left and the force left. Could you just explain that? Because I think even a lot of leftists today, I was reading one of the reviews of your book, one of the leftists said that they really liked that critique and that observation.
Yeah, well, a freedom left would be maybe like the hippies, or and then the force left would be the new left. And so the hippies just wanted to smoke whatever they wanted to smoke. They wanted to keep bombs, as the Weathermen did, or through violence, as the Black Panthers did. You go back further in American history, and this is a debate that that continues, and you see it further back. Example would be like the Yankee anarchists, people like Henry David Thoreau and Josiah Warren, who basically wanted to be left alone. They wanted an absence of a government, which is what anarchist literally means. And then you contrast them with the European anarchists, the black flag waving European anarchists who wanted to bomb people and were essentially communists, but they just called themselves anarchists. So that would be another example. Another way of looking at it, I say there's this sort of dichotomy in American history, and it's a focus on the left, but it's this cowboy versus the Puritan. And the cowboy wants to do whatever he wants to do, and the Puritan says, we know best for you. Both of them are as American as apple pie, but at least from my perspective, I find the Puritan a little bit more troubling, certainly more troubling than the cowboy.
Right, because I think isn't the original communists in America were just as they had very pro-American rhetoric, and in fact, if you look at the rhetoric from more recently, you really couldn't associate or even compare it to the original communists in America. Wouldn't you?
I wrote a book called Why the Left Hates America, focusing on the modern left and their disdain for the country that they live in. Talk about the initial communists, the ones that you're talking about. These are people who were very much within the American grain. They were Yankee communists, so to speak, and they certainly predated Marx. I think one of the errors of the left, of leftist academics, when they write the history of the American left, is that they confuse it with a history of Marxism. They can't think of any sort of left outside of that Marxist box. But what I do, and I think leftists should be grateful for this, is I rescue the history of the American left from that little Marxist trap and talk about people like Henry George and Edward Bellamy and Victoria Woodhull and John Humphrey Noyes. These are people very much within the American grain, and you can agree with them or disagree with them, but I think you're going to have a lot more success with a political ideology if you frame that ideology within the context of the country that you live in. And I think one of the problems for the American left is that they sometimes forget that they are indeed an American left.
Right, and one of the other problems you said for the American left was the Civil War, which could you explain why the Civil War is problematic for the left?
Well, before the Civil War, people like William Lloyd Garrison was what he called himself a non-resistant, which basically means you didn't want to use the force of government to coerce anyone to do anything, and that is one of the reasons why they were so against slavery. But a number of them objected to the fact that the government was using force in the Civil War, using force to emancipate the slaves. There were, in fact, even abolitionists who objected. Elijah Lovejoy in Illinois was hung, was killed by a mob, a lynch mob. He ran an abolitionist newspaper, but he resisted the mob. But he was killed. And some of the abolitionists were condemning him after he was dead because he actually resisted them. They said this violated their principles. And so you can see how the Civil War would be a very confusing event for a lot of these people. On the one hand, they hated slavery, but on the other hand, they hated the idea of government force. And so two of the characters that I look at rather intensely in one of the chapters of the book, Mary Gove Nichols and her husband, Thomas Lowe Nichols, who were sort of like the Where's Waldo of the antebellum left. They were in all of the causes that you could imagine, from free love to the Graham diet to the water cure. All of these causes that strike us as strange, they were in the mix of it. But when the Civil War came, it offended them so greatly that they left America, and they never came back. I mean, we hear leftists saying, well, if John McCain wins, I'm moving to Italy and I will never come back. Well, these two actually were good to their word. They left. They hated the idea of force and the draft and violence, and so they left. And so the Civil War is very much a demarcation point between that, the left before the war, which was based on agrarian principles and sort of demonstration, versus the left after the war, which was very much sort of a sooty and dirty industrial left, and more interested in force than in demonstration. Marx versus someone like Owen or Fourier. Owen and Fourier thought that their models could serve as, their communes could serve as models. They could demonstrate to the world how great communism is. Marx said, no, that leaves it up to the rest of the world to determine our success or failure. Force them through violence to accept our ideas, and that's why Marx is so appealing, and he goes down as sort of the communist prophet, whereas these other guys go down as just forgotten.
Right, and speaking of forgotten, though, you say like you've done a service to the left by uncovering and putting forth some of their history that seems so ignored. Why do you think? What is the base reason for that history to be ignored, other than just historians usually clinging to Marx? Why is it that we usually don't hear about the left's history and some of the actions of the leftist of leftist figures, and not necessarily because there's a bias, not necessarily because yes there is a biased media, but why does the left not even look back at their past usually?